reminds me of what you were talking about a few minutes ago. But you said that you were an elder at a commune,
Yeah,
a spiritual elder at 24 years old at a commune in Tennessee.
that's true.
Sounds like there's an interesting story behind that. What is a commune like? I guess how many years ago is that? 43 years ago.
Good
So
Lord.
1980.
Yeah, I left in the 80s. I joined in 76. So 1976. So it's relevant to what we're talking about here. So I was feeling pretty lost, not sure what I was good for. And I also had a weird situation where I had inherited money at a young age and it made me uncomfortable. It
Hmm.
made me uncomfortable to have that advantage and also to be so disoriented in the world. So I wanted to make an I I was looking for something that would make me feel more comfortable in my own skin. And I lucked in this. I've had what, from my perspective, is dumb luck all along. But I had a lucky situation where I fell in with this very practical, very down to earth, even ironic commune. But it was 1,400 hippies living in rural Tennessee, doing everything for ourselves, including that we had our own Peace Corps. I worked for 2.5 years in Guatemala doing water projects in rural villages as part of this hippie Peace Corps. I played in Guatemala's first rock band because we were in Guatemala and we played rock and they wanted rock bands, so we played these with these marimbas. But anyway, it it so I now study cults. And I would say technically it doesn't quite qualify as a cult. Certainly had cultish elements, and I was totally cultish about it. And in fact, many of us were. And what I mean by that is when you feel like you are saving the world and living a humble life, um,
Yeah.
and I was freed from doubt. I think doubt drives us nuts. And you get too much doubt and you start to have self-doubt about whether you've got what it takes to handle your doubts. It's enough to freak anybody out. And what I got there was to be part of a collective, to surrender my autonomy into this thing. I gave them my money, all the money I had at the time from this inheritance, and I don't even mind. We did good things with it. We brought some useful things to the world, and more than that, I got to see up close what it's like to relax into the the affirmation of something external. One thing that's only hit me in the last couple of weeks. Um, we talk about the virtue of self-awareness. Self-awareness is fucking terrifying. If you were to really look at yourself, it's a little bit like waiting for a cancer diagnosis. What if you
Hmm.
discover in yourself a fatal flaw? So no wonder what we would want to do is to assign the monitoring of us to something external, like a guru or a god, but it could be all sorts of things. It could be a wife, whatever. And imagine what you'd want from them. You'd want them to sound strict, but actually give you total freedom. You're golden, whatever. So you'd want your external monitor to basically give you carte blanche to be who you are. They love you. They love you no matter what, unconditionally. You'd want them to not monitor you closely, but you'd want to be able to say, "Well, God's watching me all the time." But you wouldn't be thinking about that when you're drinking or whatever. And the only thing they would ask in return is loyalty to them. So there was a way in which I did that, not with the guru who founded the thing. He was surprisingly non-hierarchical. He lived like the rest of us. I mean, he definitely had plenty of ego to pull this thing off. And ultimately, yeah, he was a problem. But he's an example. When the community decided it was over, he surrendered. He became a member of
Interesting.
the community. That was very interesting. Um, but anyway, there was something about the trust in the community that the whole community loved me, that we all worked together all day long. We were stoners. We didn't do any alcohol. We were prudish too. I was celibate for 2.5 years at age 20.
Now
And
that's something you don't think about normally with that kind of
no, that's
community.
what I mean. We were
You think
extremely
free love
pragmatic.
more. Yeah.
We were extremely pragmatic, and we had a lot to do. We built 170 buildings. Half of the 1,400 people were half of them were under 8 years old. We had to do everything from scratch for ourselves. That took a lot of work. We didn't have a lot of meetings. We didn't, and I mean, you couldn't have sex unless you were engaged to be married. I got married
Interesting.
there.
That's
So it was
almost
a
like
very different
interesting.
experience. Yeah.
That's a very productive feeling, though, having to do all of that for yourself. Now, two
It felt like
things.
a party all day long. And you were working all day long, but you were
Okay,
doing with your buds. Yeah, it was
well,
great.
sure. Well, what do you think was the differentiating factor between a cult and that? What made that not a cult?
Good question. And let me see. Well, one of the things is barriers to exit. A
That's a
cult
good
makes
one.
it really hard for you to leave. And while you could be sneered at for leaving, you know, people gossip behind your back. There was that wasn't a big thing. The other was a capacity to make fun of yourself in raw kind of ways, and we were pretty good at that. And I think another one was that we didn't. I think this would be the heart of it. Maybe. I mean, is that we there was no sense that we had an exclusive doctrine or philosophy or way of being. Um, uh, it was very, we did a lot of collaboration with the other kinds of spiritual people, including the Amish. We delivered all the Amish people around as babies, but also Yogi Bhajan and all of those various movements at the time, Ram Dass, the Zen Center. There was a sense we were all part of something, and it was loosely defined. The way we talked about it was the commonalities across all the religions. And they were things like the Golden Rule. Um, Now, I don't think the Golden Rule is a rule. It doesn't decide anything. I mean, I know people like it a lot, but I also think it's an extremely dangerous rule. To do unto a psychopath as a psychopath would want you to do unto them. I mean, it's not really a rule, but it's a good nudge, and it
Right.
made me it helped me get to a place where I was. Actually, I would say this about it. It 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 made me kinder and gentler, which is saying a lot because I'm a pistol. But um, but uh, but ultimately, I started to see the problems with kindness and gentleness. And one of the main problems you'd see on a commune is once you get to a place where everybody is actually loving and kind and trusting, you become a sitting duck for anybody who isn't. That is, if
That's a
that's
good
the
point.
social norm, at some point it becomes the ideal prey for predators. That's so. In many ways, this country is a difficult one to turn into a fascist country. In other ways, it's a really easy one. Our country's let its guard down. We got so civilized in a lot of places, or in the decision-making places, Silicon Valley, Mill Valley, um, that that has made people kind of gullible.
Mm. Well, what was the ideology of this commune? Was there an ideology?
It
Was it
was
more loosely based?
It was really loose. We had our tribal ways. Some of them were quite bizarre. For example, no one could cut their facial hair because you had to show up with your original face, what you were naturally born to look like. This
Hmm.
meant that some of the women had hair on their chins, because women sometimes do. Okay. Um, no pot. Sorry, no alcohol. No alcohol. Pot was our sacrament. We got stoned. For communion. It was like a ritual way of hanging out with each other. Great choice. I mean, when you talk about rituals for communion, that's a good clean one because the drug's an effective one for a fair number of us. It's
Sure.
um, I would say more people behave in decent ways stoned than on alcohol. Um, just for an example. But different preferences for different people and different responses for different people. So that was one. There was no alcohol. Uh, Vow of poverty. You signed a vow of poverty when you joined. They didn't ask me for my money. I just had to come poor. That is, I had to come without without additional resources. So the cars were communally owned. The food, which I was in charge of for a couple of years, we would buy what we could and then distribute it per per capita. It was basically we did borrow this from we borrowed from all over. We had quotes from Jesus and Buddha and all that, but it wasn't that's part of why it wasn't a doctrine. It wasn't a lifestyle brand. It was looser than that. And the permeability is once again the issue. Absolutism is impermeability. There's nothing that could penetrate and get through to a narcissist. That's the point of it. It's hermetically sealed. So to be somewhat receptive, and people talk about being open-minded. I don't want to be open-minded. No, I don't. I want to be curious. And what that to me means is curating my assumptions, which means I'm taking in some, I'm leaving out some, I'm dropping some, I'm accumulating new ones. I'm mostly trying to bring clashing ideas together and study the clashes. So when someone says, be intolerant of intolerance, or commit yourself to flexibility, or do not be negative, or you shouldn't be